2nd Nephi as a legal document. Considering the writing conventions of the culture, I suggest that 2nd Nephi is best understood as a legal archive or collection of legal documents. Supporting this view are Nephi's allusions to sealing the record and to a bar of judgment, his discussion of the law of witnesses, his reference to Isaiah and Jacob as witnesses, components, and formatting consistent with Neo-Babylonian deposition and plaintiff statements. Finally, 2nd Nephi has uncharacteristically formal and highly faithful citations. Aspects of 2nd Nephi 6-33 are consistent with ancient Near East trial and legal proceedings, particularly those demonstrated in Neo-Babylonian legal culture. Both Jan Martin's and Jack Welch's observation that 2nd Nephi 1-4 serves as a de facto treaty or legal document strengthens this position and forces us to consider the words of Jacob and Isaiah in that context. Viewing the inclusion of Jacob and Isaiah's words as a witness is almost inescapable. Nephi's references to judicial procedure are unmistakable and leave an impression on the reader. Less straightforward is the structure of 2nd Nephi, which is consistent with legal documents and convention of the day. Knowledge of this structure clarifies Nephi's message. I will also touch on a few of the resulting implications. 2nd Nephi contains an agreement, followed by 3 witness statements, followed by a plaintiff statement. Introduction and Literature Review. The 2nd Book of Nephi has confounded readers for more than 100 years. Highlighting its importance, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland stated, "Standing like a sentinel at the gate of the Book of Mormon, the writings in 2nd Nephi admit us into the scriptural presence of the Lord." Casual readers, however, may view 2nd Nephi as a compilation of instructive but unrelated incidents, doctrines, and prophecies. Perhaps because the book of 2nd Nephi remains enigmatic, its structure has been the subject of sustained inquiry over the years. While there are many perspectives among scholars, few of them are mutually exclusive. For example, Frederick Axelgard argues for a holistic interpretation of both books written by Nephi. He notes the spiritual themes in 2nd Nephi parallel the historical themes in 1st Nephi, as they have similar themes presented in the same order. Joseph Spencer has reasonably suggested modern readers overlook a major division within 2nd Nephi. Noel Reynolds's investigation has led to the discovery of an overarching symmetrical or chiastic structure centered on 2nd Nephi 11, which indicates 2nd Nephi presents itself foremost as a witness of Christ. John Welch has demonstrated that the initial portion of 2nd Nephi is the ancient equivalent of Lehi's will and testament. Lehi's words direct the distribution of land, establish Nephi as a leader, adopt Zoram and other actions. According to Welch, this functions as a legal and constitutional basis for several future centuries of Nephite thought and life, when compared with ancient Near Eastern texts. Terrell Given's comments are similar. He shows that 2nd Nephi establishes a broader Nephite identity. Givens does this by comparing the Nephites' history with that of the Jews exiled to Babylon. Givens notes the Babylonian exile was met with a counter-reaction that solidified Jewish thought, text, and language. He points out the Babylonian exile ultimately led to the production and adoption of the Torah. Similarly, the Nephites, unnerved by the fall of Jerusalem, the center of Jewish worship, needed to forge a new identity. 2nd Nephi reassures there is a new land of promise. Jerusalem was so fundamental and crucial in First Temple period religion and culture that it may have been the announcement of the destruction of Jerusalem that prompted the division of 1st and 2nd Nephi. Jan Martin demonstrates the initial 5 chapters of 2nd Nephi are a highly structured suzerain covenant consistent with ancient Near Eastern tradition. Martin identifies sections within 2nd Nephi containing preamble, historical prologue, stipulations, blessings and cursings, and instructions for preserving and remembering the covenant. However, a final component of suzerain treaties that appears absent on initial evaluation is a list of witnesses. Juxtaposing the covenantal documents of Deuteronomy and 2nd Nephi to contrast them both, Martin states, Moses specified that the heavens and the earth were witnesses, Deuteronomy 32:1, and he directed that large, inscribed stones be set up on the banks of the river Jordan as witnesses to Israel's covenant renewal. See Deuteronomy 27:1-3. If Lehi did something similar with objects, Nephi did not record it on the small plates. Martin continues by stating that Lehi's descendants, who were all present at the covenant renewal ceremony, could easily have served as the witnesses to the covenant. I hold most closely with Martin's and Given's perspective, 2nd Nephi is a collection of writings that forms the ethos of the new Nephite nation, covenant, and identity. However, in contrast to Martin, I hold there is an explicit identification of witnesses within 2nd Nephi. The concept of objects as a witness in ancient Mesopotamia. It is well understood that an object could function as a witness in the ancient Near East. Most legal transactions were presumably oral, but both objects and persons qualified as witnesses. For instance, a carcass, garment, document, or an oath could be considered a witness in legal proceedings. This knowledge helps inform our reading of material originating in that place and time. For example, Potiphar's wife's use of Joseph's garment to support her accusations against him, and when the sons of Israel presented Joseph's torn garment as proof of his demise, are examples of an object serving as a witness to purported events. Likewise, the tablets containing the 10 Commandments are more than written admonitions. The tablets themselves are a proof of the covenant with God. In his paper, An Everlasting Witness, Ancient Writings on Metal, Reynolds demonstrates just as in the Near East, the Nephites also viewed writing as a witness. He writes that the Nephites knew metal plates would play a major role in God's final work. That vision resulted in creation, transmission, and maintenance of written witnesses. Aspects of 2nd Nephi allow it to be viewed as a witness in its time for multiple reasons. The book of 2nd Nephi contains unique cultural and legal components that will be clearly understood by contemporary readers. The concept of objects functioning as witnesses is not unique to the ancient Near East or the Nephites. When we read about any culture, we need to consider the cultural and legal norms of that time and place. We cannot impose our modern legal system or cultural values on the past. This applies to our reading of the book of 2nd Nephi, which contains cultural and legal elements that, however alien to us, would have been familiar to its intended audience. Legal documents. Throughout the ancient Near East in Nephi's time, documents were produced by professional scribes, whose training and standing stood as guarantees of their documents' validity. Parties to legal actions, therefore, need not have signed legal documents to confirm their validity or to place them in force. The mere existence of a record produced by a known scribe could authenticate a record. An example of this is a surviving Demotic Egyptian divorce certificate, BM 351, from 490 BCE. The document states the case for the divorce and ends succinctly: Scribe, Horus, son of Neshorpokrat. No seal, signatures, or list of witnesses accompany the scribe's name. Our modern notion that a document's validity can be confirmed by witnesses' signatures did not exist in Nephi's time. This is particularly noteworthy in our discussion, as archaeological evidence suggests that scribes operated in Israel after Egyptian custom, and Nephi states he was trained in the language of the Egyptians. He also had formal training as a scribe. Nephi's knowledge of Judean law invites the strong possibility that he was able to produce legally admissible documents. If 2nd Nephi is considered a collection of documents, do those documents have significance beyond their religious meaning? For example, Jack Welsh has demonstrated that 2nd Nephi 1-4 is the will and testament of Lehi. It assigns lands and designates the future leader of the people. Neo-Babylonian depositions. In Neo-Babylonian tradition, documents discovered and used in legal proceedings included certain details. Pertaining to our discussion, official statements made in court often, but not always, appear without a seal. Instead, they typically state persons present that witness hearing the statement, as well as the scribe's name, date, and a place of composition. Documents containing a judge's decision contain seals in addition to those items found on a deposition. In describing ancient Mesopotamian court proceedings, Holtz describes 4 types of recorded depositions: accusatory, testimonial, memoranda, and sworn depositions. There are no identifying markings on court statements to identify them as depositions. This is in contrast to records from Old Babylonian, when statements made in court typically would begin with tablet of confirmation, or tablet with a sworn statement. Common to all formats is the phrase personal name said thus. Depositions do not describe the entire dispute, nor do they appeal directly to the judge to render a specific decision. They are made before officials or a group of people, and typically state to whom the declarations are made, or who was present when the statement was made. Studies suggest that some depositions used in legal cases were made in unofficial settings. Court record could also be made outside of official buildings. This may have been out of necessity. It is not likely that all judiciaries had equal access to courtrooms. A discussion of judiciaries will follow. Therefore, Holtz identifies depositions based on their content, inclusion in the legal archive, and their references to adjudicating authorities and audiences. Depending on the type of deposition, the scribe may or may not be identified. As their name suggests, only sworn depositions document an oath taken by the speaker. Using Holtz's analysis as a guide, Jacob's, Isaiah's, and Nephi's words in 2 Nephi, 2 Nephi 6-10, 12-24, and 25-28 respectively, constitute a formal witness deposition. The lack of surviving First Temple documents makes it difficult to create a detailed taxonomy of writing from that time, and it is likely that entire genres from that era are unknown to us. It follows that we cannot establish with perfect certainty the precise nature of a text dating from Neo-Babylonian times. However, the characteristics of surviving depositions written in the context of regionally adjacent legal systems can support our analysis. These characteristics can identify writings that are consistent with such works. Research has shown conclusively cultures across Mesopotamia, including Israel, had significant influence on each other's legal systems. This makes comparison of Nephi's writing with contemporary legal documents essential. Unlike their modern cognates, legal depositions in Nephi's time record an individual statement without any other explicit indication of the surrounding proceedings. They also lack titles or headers that explicitly identify them as depositions, and thus are not easily distinguished based on opening words. Our analysis of the content surrounding such documents may therefore be our best guide to their original purpose. As stated previously, both Martin and Welsh depict 2 Nephi 1-4 as a covenant or treaty. Witnesses to the agreement should be mentioned. Jacob's statement comes immediately following the agreement. It is placed in the record without any explanation. It is only afterwards that Nephi states why he included Jacob's words. In the following parallelism, Nephi strongly suggests that Jacob's words in 2 Nephi 6-10 and Isaiah's in 2 Nephi 12-24 originated as witness statements. Wherefore, I will send Jacob and Isaiah's words forth unto my children to prove that my words are true. Nevertheless, God sendeth more witnesses, and he proveth all his words. 2 Nephi 11:3, emphasis mine. This citation presents a parallelism suggesting Jacob and Isaiah is the term witness. Bruce Van Orden supports this view. Chapter 11 of 2 Nephi serves to connect the witnesses of Jacob, Nephi, and Isaiah, and it is here that Nephi explicitly applied the law of witnesses. In that light, Nephi's decision to use the law of witnesses under the law of Moses to support his assertion of Christ's existence may have been far more than a rhetorical flourish. It may well have been a way to substantiate his claim in terms that were relevant and practical within the norms of his time. The Law of Witnesses. The law of witnesses, as understood by those in the First Temple period and the way it is understood by Latter-day Saints, is likely different. A Latter-day Saint may believe the law of witnesses refers to multiple sources establishing the truth of the Scriptures. For example, there are 3 witnesses that testify of the existence of the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. However, occurring in the midst of a list of civil laws, the law of witnesses appears to be focused on protecting the accused from immediate consequences of violated civil laws. Deuteronomy 17:6 KJV states, "At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death." Therefore, this convention, law, was used in judicial settings. Its implementation in the Second Temple period also suggests it was used in judicial settings. The law of witnesses appears modified in both rabbinic literature and in Qumran rules, but still refers to civil law imposing immediate consequences. Debate exists among non-Latter-day Saint scholars regarding Paul's reference of the law of witnesses in Corinthians. With this background, it is no surprise that scholars argue Paul intends to take disciplinary action with judicial proceeding or proceedings upon his return. Although Latter-day Saints may be familiar with the law of witnesses as a way to determine the verity of gospel truths, it appears to be exclusively used in legal settings in Judean culture. Nephi states Jacob's statement is used as a witness, and he continues as if justifying his invocation of the law of witnesses. Behold, my soul delighteth in proving unto my people the truth of the coming of Christ. For this end hath the law of Moses been given, and all things which have been given of God from the beginning of the world unto man are the typifying of him. 2 Nephi 11:4. By implication, it is perfectly acceptable for Nephi to use or appropriate the legal convention of the law of witnesses to prove Christ's existence. Nephi's use of witnesses from a legal perspective, as well as the use of official legal convention, may be somewhat jarring to modern readers who differentiate between the affairs of church and state. But Nephi reassures the reader. Ultimately, because God gave the law of Moses to prove the truth of the coming of Christ, it follows that Nephi can use civil legal convention for the same purpose. This is especially true, as such a separation of civil and moral law, suggests J. Daniel Hayes, imposes one's view on the text from outside the text. Nephi's explanation suggests his society can differentiate between civil and moral law. Regardless, there may not be a similar division between the two as we see today. Therefore, the use of legal convention for spiritual purposes may not be entirely unreasonable. Comparative analysis of the term prove in the Book of Mormon. Nephi states that he delights in proving to his people the truth. To better understand the Nephite concept of proof, I will turn to comparative analysis. As recorded in Alma 34:6-7, Amulek states Alma has proved that the Word is in Christ, verses 6. Amulek is explicit. Alma proved this by calling upon the words of Zenos and Zenock and Moses, verses 7. It appears the cultural understanding of a proof in Nephite society refers to the expression of testimonies. This usage is also seen when another prophet named Nephi exposes Seantum as the murder of a chief judge. Nephi provides a miraculous sign. However, this is not what proved the case. Following a confession that Seantum was brought to prove that he himself was the very murderer. The only contribution to the case made by Seantum was his testimony. Yet Mormon writes it was Seantum that proved the issue. These examples suggest it is a testimony that constitutes proof in Nephite society. Ryan Sharp's conclusion, parallelism, and comparative analysis are multiple details that show Nephi is using the words of both Isaiah and Jacob as a witness. Additionally, considering the contemporary culture, Nephi's explanation of the law of witnesses is best understood to refer to civil legal conventions. Components of Neo-Babylonian depositions. I return to the structure of Jacob's words that suggest it is a witness statement. Yos 6131 gives the following example of the beginning of a deposition. The Mar Bani, in whose presence Ani Mahaya saw, the messenger of the crown prince, said thus to Nabasada Osor, the Sadesari, administrator of the Iana. This is followed by a first-person narration describing 3 cows being entrusted to another's care. This statement contains no unique individual feature to identify it as a witness deposition. Holtz does identify it as a deposition because of its inclusion in the relevant legal record. In this excerpt, one notes the identification of the audience, as well as the use of formal titles. In his analysis of Neo-Babylonian depositions, Holtz notes that the majority of depositions did not include a sworn statement or the recording of an oath. In place of these, depositions typically described the audience in front of whom the statement was made. A deposition could be taken before a local tribunal. It was recorded under the format. These are the witnesses before whom, personal names stated. Knowing this convention may increase our understanding of the seemingly trivial words Nephi places in the superscription prior to Jacob's statement. He writes, "The words of Jacob, the brother of Nephi, which he spake unto the people of Nephi." 2 Nephi 6:1. The mention of the audience, the people of Nephi, may be viewed as the inclusion of witnesses present at Jacob's statement, and not merely a historical detail. Biblical superscriptions typically do not include mentions of the audience. The information contained in the heading prior to Jacob's words is more consistent with contemporary legal documents rather than scriptural text. Together, Jacob's writing in 2 Nephi 6-10 can be viewed as a deposition, because Nephi's use of parallelism suggests Jacob is a witness. Its placement in the record, following a covenant, the formal title presenting Jacob, and the mention of the audience. Sworn depositions and oaths. When depositions were made under oath, surprisingly little notation was used. Typical notation is, they swore, saying, indeed, followed by the statement. At times, the name of a deity was recorded as well. The following is an example from case regarding a deposit of silver from BM 41663. Lines 9 to 11. Rimut, son of Samislay, descendant of Arabtu, swore by Samsus before the judges, and said thus. Line 11 to 12. I and Seleah are the creditors, with debts owed by Idin, Marduk. We did not know that silver was deposited with Nabal Suma Iskun. I will note that this tablet is sealed with the scribe's seal. This statement depicts the two essential aspects of an oath, which are statement of sincerity, an authenticating factor, and the oath content. Nephi's rhetoric in 2 Nephi 25:4, and to a lesser extent 2 Nephi 28:1, have features that are found in contemporary oaths. Blaine Conklin writes, oaths are generally authenticated either by appealing to a precious entity outside oneself or by calling down a curse. While it is not required to link the oath content and authenticating element, an explanation or causal relationship is often expressed with a complementizer. Finally, the oath content may contain a protasis stating the claim, and an apodosis stating the consequence if the claim is not verified. Typically, the oath content omits the apodosis. 2 Nephi 25:4 contains these components. Claim. I give unto you a prophecy. Authenticating element, precious entity. According to the Spirit which is in me. Claim restated. Wherefore I shall prophesy according to the plainness which hath been with me from the time that I came out from Jerusalem with my father. Complementizer. For behold, my soul delighteth in plainness unto my people, that they may learn. When the apodosis is elided, the resulting consequence is not entirely clear. For example, despite numerous oaths that swear with the life of a deity, to call a potential curse on the respected third party has not been performed as far as we know. Therefore, potential unstated consequences for Nephi may include death, i.e., for being a false prophet, or perhaps an acknowledgement the Spirit is not in him. These two scenarios are in no way comprehensive. Another consequence might include punishment by the Spirit, upon which he swore, or to provide reparations of that which was lost due to Nephi's testimony. At the very least, it appears that Nephi is staking all his credibility on his prophecy. Nephi's stylized oath appears functionally equivalent to Judean oaths of the time as well. A comparable oath is found in 1 Kings 22:14. Micaiah said, As the Lord lives, I shall speak whatever the Lord tells me. Nephi's prophecy is again attested in 2 Nephi 28:1. Nephi writes, And now, behold, my brethren, I have spoken unto you, according as the Spirit hath constrained me. Wherefore, I know that they must surely come to pass. Nephi's use of the term surely is consistent with King James wording used to record sworn oaths. Further analysis is complicated as the composition in the original language is not extant. At the very least, Nephi appears to be staking his entire character and credibility on this prophecy, the Spirit which hath been with me from the time that I came out from Jerusalem. Identifying the audience, formal introduction of speakers, the inclusion of an oath, as well as the collocation with an agreement are consistent with Neo-Babylonian witness depositions. Because the early chapters of 2 Nephi contain a suzerain treaty, and Lehi's legal will, we must consider the words of Jacob, Isaiah, and Nephi as witness depositions. Neo-Babylonian legal procedure and plaintiff statements. Aside from those identified by Martin, additional components in 2 Nephi suggest it contains writings informed by legal conventions. These include a plaintiff statement, the promise of additional proof provided by the plaintiff and witness depositions. Additionally, legal rhetoric mentioning the law of witnesses, sealing the record, and a judgment bar appears to be an explicit reference to judicial activity. Due to the lack of records from Egyptian legal proceedings of necessity, we must turn to other ancient Near Eastern cultures to understand the conventions that might have held sway in Nephi's time and place. Some of these conventions were standardized over large regions. After evaluating a series of legal proceedings from multiple cities contemporary to Nephi, Shalom Holtz wrote the most common format of Neo-Babylonian plaintiff statements includes 3 components. These are A. Opening, mention of plaintiff and adjudicating authority. B. Quotation of plaintiff's statement. C. Imperative to authority. For example, the document Yos 19-101, written in 545 BCE and discovered in Babylon, discusses a decision record from a case that apparently pertains to a misappropriated shipment of dates. This document provides an example of a plaintiff's statement. The first 25 lines are translated as follows. Opening. Lines 1 to 3. Nergal-Resua, the slave of Idin-Marduk, said thus to the judges of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. Quotation of plaintiff's statement. Lines 3 to 6. Idin-Marduk, my master, loaded a shipment of 480 kur of dates for transport from the hinterland on the boats belonging to Amru-Natan, the boatman, son of a mayor. Line 7. He had him bear the responsibility for keeping the dates. Line 8 to 10. He brought the boats to Babylon, and he gave me Idin-Marduk's message. 480 gur of dates was written in it. Lines 11 to 12. I took account of the dates, and 47 gur 1 pi were missing. Lines 12 to 14. I raised a claim against Amru-Natan concerning the missing amount of the dates, and thus. Lines 14 to 15. I did not take your dates. Line 15. Afterwards, an informer. Line 16. 4 gur 1 pi of dates. Line 17. And behind my boat. Line 18. Those dates in. Lines 19 to 20. We contracted a contract stating thus. Amru-Natan illegally took 7 gur 1 pi of dates. Lines 22 to 23. After Amru-Natan wrote his contract until today. Line 24. Now I have brought him before you. Imperative to authority. Line 25. Establish our decision. The opening statement is demonstrated by mention of the plaintiff and adjudicating authority in lines 1 to 3. The plaintiff statement is given in lines 3 to 24. Finally, there is an imperative to authorities that demands a judgment in line 25. This format is used by Isaiah in records that survive in the Bible. For example, in the parable of the vineyard, Isaiah states, "And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard." KJV, Isaiah 5:3. According to Holtz, additional features of this passage in Isaiah make the allusion to a courtroom explicit. Such explicit allusions to a courtroom further suggest plaintiff statements indicate a degree of specificity. Isaiah first summarizes the facts of the case, then identifies the adjudicating body, before demanding a judgment with an imperative. Near the end of Nephi's writing, the same formula is written. Nephi states, Opening. I, Nephi, cannot write all the things which were taught among my people, neither am I mighty in writing, like unto speaking. For when a man speaketh by the power of the Holy Ghost, the power of the Holy Ghost carrieth it unto the hearts of the children of men. But I, Nephi, have written what I have written. Quotation of plaintiff's statement. And now, my beloved brethren, and also Jew, and all ye ends of the earth, these records are the words of Christ. Imperative to authority. And if they are not the words of Christ, judge ye. Nephi mentions himself, the audience, and his claim before demanding a decision. This language is consistent with that found in legal records. An additional characteristic of ancient Mesopotamian court proceedings within 2nd Nephi is the promise of additional proof provided by the plaintiff is entered into the record. This is in sharp contrast of today's convention. In modern times, all evidence must be presented before a judgment can be made. Shalom Holtz notes, most of the guarantees for testimony can be shown to be the result for the guarantor's accusations that must be substantiated. In these cases, the accusations were made during formal hearings, after which the guarantor assumed responsibility for the testimony. Nephi does this by stating, Christ will show unto you, with power and great glory, that they are his words, at the last day, and you and I shall stand face to face before this bar, and ye shall know that I have been commanded of him to write these things. 2 Nephi 33:11. The promise of additional proof to be provided in the future is common in Neo-Babylonian court procedure. Here, Nephi's record is consistent with contemporary legal proceedings. Because Nephi glories in plainness, he may include rhetoric describing his record as a legal document. Nephi mentions the law of witnesses, 2 Nephi 11:3. He also mentions sealing the record, 2 Nephi 33:15. In the final paragraphs of 2 Nephi, he alludes to a judgment bar. Nephi's final message makes more explicit reference to court proceedings. Verse 15, for example, reads, "For what I seal on earth shall be brought against you at the judgment bar." All 12 mentions of the word bar in the Book of Mormon refer to a setting of judgment, regardless of whether the outcome of that judgment is characterized as positive or negative. The reader's role. The reader's position in this setting is initially ambiguous. Following the implications of this plaintiff's statement, Nephi posits the reader in an adjudicating role. It appears then that the words of Christ themselves are on trial. Nephi writes, "If they are not the words of Christ, judge ye." The reader's role in the proceedings is therefore ambiguous. Additionally, unlike other prophets in the Book of Mormon, Nephi does not posit God as a judge. When the reader is the defendant, Nephi identifies Christ's words as the judge. Nephi states, "He shall bring forth his words unto them, which words shall judge them at the last day." 2 Nephi 25:18. Restating the point, Nephi writes that the nations who shall possess the writings in question shall be judged of them according to the words which are written. Verse 22. Therefore, in this future courtroom, it appears Nephi is not speaking rhetorically. The reader and the written word assume the roles of both judge and defendant at different times. While Nephi's allusion to a judgment bar is explicit, our relationship with God in the courtroom is more ambiguous and nuanced. To better comprehend these implications, I will discuss ancient judicial structures. Ancient Near East judicial structure. Because of such prevalent legal components, the context of both Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian legal systems must be considered for the interpretation of Nephi's terms. In Nephi's day, the legal systems of neighboring nations allowed for appeals. Prior to that era, appeals were generally not allowed in Mesopotamia. Leaders had embodied deity, and judgments were immutable. To appeal a judgment put in question the capability of the leader. Even an attempt to appeal could result in punishment. This was not completely impractical, as punishment could be levied for false testimony. However, this stands in stark contrast to procedure in the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian kingdoms, where the practice of appeal was widely practiced. The relatively new practice of appeal allowed defendants of the time to criticize lower court judges. While the king was ultimately responsible for justice, he was less directly involved in the process. This resulted in numerous letters directed to Neo-Assyrian kings, complaining of injustice by appointed representatives, and subsequently requesting appeal. Further, appeals may have been needed due to what could be viewed as two legal systems in existence simultaneously. State administrators who were not legal professionals, such as treasurers, eunuchs, and cupbearers, were eligible to adjudicate cases. In contrast to the modern concept of mediator, these lower judges were state officials. Pierre Villard notes, there also existed, alongside the notables acting as judges, a specialized judicial administration, directed by two of the highest figures in the state. While this approach involved multiple levels of judges, they all derived their judicial authority from the king, and acted as his representatives. Appeals for justice were therefore made by seeking the word of the king. Villard continues, Neo-Assyrian kings did not themselves pronounce the verdict in the cases submitted to them, but delegated this task to those whom they deemed competent for it. From the point of view of the petitioners, it was indeed the king who had rendered justice to them. 2 Nephi seems to be informed by this view. Consistent with the tradition of his day, Nephi does not place God as a judge. Rather, the word of God will judge, and Christ will stand by and verify they are his words. In Nephi's judicially inflected writings, when the reader is at the judgment bar of God, the judge should be a representative of God. In this case, the words of Christ. The Hebrew concept of words, dabar, carries with it the presumption that words contain the essence or fundamental character of their reference. Therefore, the word of the Lord can act as a representative of the Lord, just as judges and designated functionaries at the time acted as representatives of the king. Additional meanings of dabar include law or reality. It follows that the judge could be understood to be God's law or God's reality. Nephi's imperative to the reader is to judge if his words are the words of Christ. It is an imperative to judge if the book of 2 Nephi represents God's representative, his law, and his reality. In the process, Nephi explicitly posits the revealed law, expressed in words, as subjugate to God, mirroring the relationship between judicial functionaries and the embodiment of legal authority, the king. While one has right to appeal and invoke the word of the king, Nephi assures the reader that his words are God's words. Differences between Nephi's record and legal records. It would be irresponsible to omit key differences between Nephi's writings in 2nd Nephi and Neo-Babylonian trial records. A few of these include the detail of the writing, the absence of list of names, and perhaps sealing. We do not have many details. These differences do not change the overall interpretation. First, Nephi appears to be writing a verbatim record, whereas the latter records are shorter and contain more narrative. For example, following a citation from a witness, Yos 766 reads, "We were digging below the canal wall together with Nenea Idin, son of Inin-Zera Ibni, when we killed 2 ducks, property of the Lady of Uruk, from the pen of Nidintu and Guzanu, sons of Nenea Idin. We buried them in the mud." The record continues as a summary. The corpses of these 2 birds were inspected in the assembly. The assembly judges decided they must pay a 30-fold restitution for the 2 ducks. In this case, the actual words of the judges are never recorded. Even the testimony of the defendant is so brief that it may be a summary rather than a verbatim record. Perhaps a contributing factor in Neo-Babylonian record-keeping are complications of the medium. The brevity depicted in Neo-Babylonian records is not ubiquitous in the ancient Near East. In the region of Ramesses II, a surviving statement, Cairo 65739, from a Theban court appears to include much more detail, perhaps more likely to be a verbatim recording. "As for myself, I am the wife of the district superintendent Simut, and I came to dwell in his house, and I worked in weaving, caring for my clothing. Now in the regnal year 15, in the 7th year of my having entered into the house of the district superintendent Simut, the merchant Rhea approached me with the Syrian slave Gemneheramentet, while she was a young girl, and he said to me, 'Buy this young girl, and give to me her price.' So he said to me, and I took the young girl, and I gave to him her price. Now look, I am saying the price which I gave for her in the presence of the authorities, list of items, and I gave them to the merchant Rhea, without there being any property of the citizeness Bakamut among them, and he gave to me this little girl, and I called her Gemneheramentet by name." The papyrus goes on to record the judge's response. This papyrus predates the Neo-Babylonian records by several hundred years. I present it as a comparison because existing judicial records from Egypt are rare. Cairo 65739 suggests the procedure in Egypt was closer to a word-for-word recording. The paucity of extant records from Israel suggests they were also made on a less durable medium, i.e. such as papyrus observed here, if indeed written judicial records were ever produced. It is reasonable that less durable material facilitated longer recordings. A second deviation between Nephi's writing and Mesopotamian judicial records is the lack of a list of persons present. In Yos 766, the names of the assembled judges are listed following the decision. Likewise, in Cairo 65739, the names of 6 persons who are present were listed. These are the names of persons that are present who could attest to the proceedings. In contrast, Nephi does not list individual hearers of his words toward the end of his record. He does state that the words were taught among my people. 2 Nephi 33:1. Yet, following the plaintiff's statement, Nephi does state that Christ will show unto the reader that they are his words. 2 Nephi 33:11. This does have a loose similarity with the legal convention of the time. Those listed at the conclusion of the record can attest to the veracity of the record. Finally, following the list of names of those present, there would often be a seal. Likewise, immediately after mentioning Christ as a witness, Nephi states he seals the record. This is a unique feature because books contained in the Hebrew Bible, as they are presented today, do not contain a seal. There are references to sealed documents in the Bible. For example, Nehemiah 10:1 refers to a covenant made with the Lord that was sealed by dozens of those in agreement. In 2 Nephi 33 there is a reference to a seal. However, there is no record of a seal. Nephi may be speaking rhetorically or referencing the record as inaccessible. Jewish tradition does understand some uses of the word seal. Chatham in Songs of Solomon 4:12 is understood as locked or inaccessible. If Nephi was speaking literally, the seal may have been removed, or the seal inscription wasn't included in translation. Many references in the Hebrew Bible to sealed legal documents appears to be literal, i.e. Jeremiah 32:11-15. The act of using a physical seal in ancient Israel is well attested. Seals of the time typically had 2 lines, which contained a name and a title or patronym. Legal custom in the surrounding region was to make multiple copies of judicial records. The sealed copy would have the seal or seals of judge or judges present. Copies of the sealed document would include inscriptions of the seal or seals. To my knowledge, the manner of sealing metal records is not described. Regardless, whether Nephi is speaking rhetorically or literally, that Nephi mentions sealing the document immediately after naming a witness is certainly reminiscent of the contemporary legal practice we have been discussing. The paucity of books in the Hebrew Bible containing a seal and the simultaneous widespread use of seals in legal records suggest there is a degree of specificity to a sealing reference. In these matters, Nephi's record is more similar to contemporary legal documents than religious writings. Changes in literary style of 2nd Nephi. The start of Nephi's first book is richly detailed. Nephi discusses commandments, recounts events, cites the Lord, recalls his visions and his father's blessings, among other things. Despite these occurrences being vital and formative, the somewhat informal tone and structure resembles a discursive memoir. First, starting in 2nd Nephi 6:1, Nephi includes Jacob's words abruptly and without explanation. Second, perhaps the most obvious change is Nephi's formal introduction of words attributed to others in the form of superscriptions. These are found in 2nd Nephi 6:1, 12:1. Prior to these, Nephi has discussed his father's vision of the tree of life, cited God, and recorded prophecies and visions without the addition of superscriptions, except for those found at the beginning of the book. Third, Nephi demonstrates a new tendency to introduce figures with biographical information. This feature is clearly seen in 2nd Nephi 6:1, which reads, "The words of Jacob, the brother of Nephi, which he spake." This verse, which some refer to as a heading, was purposefully added by Nephi and serves no important narrative purpose. We have already read about Jacob in 1st Nephi 18, 2nd Nephi 2, and 2nd Nephi 5. The reader knows Jacob is Nephi's brother. Regardless, while we can never be sure of Nephi's reason for reintroducing Jacob this way, his choice does connote a level of formality not previously apparent in his writings. Fourth, a change after 2nd Nephi 6 is Nephi's use of second-person references. Prior to 2nd Nephi 6, Nephi refers to the reader just once, in 1st Nephi 1:20. After 2nd Nephi 6, he does so approximately 30 times, supporting the view that 2nd Nephi is distinct from 1st Nephi and is a direct message to the reader. Finally, a greater portion of the 2nd book of Nephi is composed of citations that are likely recorded verbatim. The citations of Isaiah in 2nd Nephi 12-24 appear in longer forms, appear to have a higher fidelity than other Isaiah paraphrastic quotations. Much of Nephi's other Isaiah-centric writing can be termed exegetical. Exegetical techniques of the period were accepted and expected as a core scribal activity. They included exegetical manipulation, harmonization, paraphrasing, allusion, and the addition of new material. Consistent with the period and with his training, it appears that Nephi uses all of these techniques throughout his corpus. Yet, he employs none of them in 2nd Nephi 12-24, which appears to contain nothing but deliberate, faithful citations of its source. Because scribal activity in the First Temple period included adaptive and exegetical techniques, a verbatim citation is unique. Perhaps it is the exception rather than the rule. Based on the significant differences between 1st and 2nd Nephi, it may be superfluous to demonstrate the citation in 2nd Nephi 12-24 is indeed a verbatim citation. However, in the interest of demonstrating Nephi's intent may have been to record a veritable witness deposition, we need to discuss why Nephi is citing Isaiah. Textual analysis is best performed in a text's original language. However, Nephi's original writings have not survived to the present day. Of necessity, then, we are left to compare the King James Version of Isaiah with the Book of Mormon, the earliest text. This is not an entirely expedient choice. Scholars have found evidence to suggest that the language of the King James Bible is the language or base text of the Book of Mormon. While a full discussion of this relationship is beyond the scope of this, it is enough for our purposes to demonstrate that recent scholarship supports the view that the King James Version is our closest available analogue to Nephi's English text. Given the high volume of verses of Isaiah referenced in Nephi's writings, more than 400, these two works lend themselves to quantitative comparison. After manual comparison by two reviewers, Tvedtnes documented all variations between multiple versions of the Isaiah and Nephi texts. Altogether, he found 416 Isaiah verses cited in the first and second books of Nephi. Figure 1 demonstrates the percentage of verses with variance according to his study. In 2nd Nephi 12 to 24, he found that 126 of the 275 verses, 46%, contained minor variance on the source material. In Isaiah, citations outside of 2nd Nephi 12 to 24, 116 of the 141 verses, 79%, demonstrate a variant. The difference between those proportions is statistically significant, and the magnitude of the difference is meaningful. A discussion of the implications will follow. Tvetnes also noted dozens of major variants that he termed paraphrases. No major variants were found inside 2nd Nephi 12 to 24. While this data may appear convincing, these studies are significantly limited in that they do not attempt to measure causality. For that, we must rely on context. The differing rates of variance suggest that at least one section en bloc was systematically treated differently, intentionally or otherwise, than its corresponding analog. The surrounding context suggests the non-random distribution of variance is due to Nephi's conscious decision to leave aside exegetical techniques and cite Isaiah verbatim. At minimum, the apparent non-random distribution of variance suggests that the texts were handled in different ways at least once in their long history. This supports our discussion that the writing in 2nd Nephi is unique to that in 1st Nephi. To get a sense of the fidelity with which Nephi treats 2nd Nephi 12 to 24, we can compare it to a corresponding section in 2nd Nephi 30. Fortunately, we have a section of Isaiah that appears to be cited on 2 occasions by Nephi, Table 1. While acknowledging the limits of textual criticism across translated texts, if we assume the English translation has any degree of correlation with the base text, then it does appear that these 2 passages appear differently as Nephi wrote them. However, because analysis of Dead Sea Scrolls show that early written texts existed in multiple parallel versions, it is possible that Nephi has multiple versions of Isaiah on the brass plates. Based on the conventions of the time, I would expect Nephi to change Isaiah's words in 2nd Nephi 30. Surrounding 2nd Nephi 30, there is other evidence of his inner scriptural exegesis. Nephi employs all 5 techniques identified by George Brooke as characteristic of scribes when performing such exegesis. He uses the term rewritten scriptural text to define the genre of that time. These include 1. The source is thoroughly embedded in its rewritten form, not as explicit citation, but as running text. 2. The dependence of a rewritten scriptural text on its source is also such that the order of the source is followed extensively. 3. The dependence of a rewritten scriptural text on its source is also such that the content of the source is followed relatively closely without very many major insertions or omissions. 4. The original genre or genres stays much the same. 5. And finally, the new texts are not composed to replace the authoritative sources which they rework. Whatever Nephi's motivations behind the difference between 2nd Nephi 21, 4 to 10, and 2nd Nephi 30, 10 to 16, Table 1, only latter text is firmly exegetical. First, 2nd Nephi 30, 10 to 16 is embedded without defining where Isaiah's words start or stop. Second, much of the order of 2nd Nephi 30 follows that of Isaiah 11. Third, there are no major insertions. Fourth, the subject matter of Isaiah 11 and 2nd Nephi 30 are similar. Finally, there is no suggestion that 2nd Nephi 30 replaces Isaiah's words. Whereas prior to the citation of 2nd Nephi 21, Nephi suggests his text may replace Isaiah's words as a copy. He writes, "And now I write some of the words of Isaiah, that whoso of my people shall see these words may lift up their hearts and rejoice for all men. Now, these are the words." 2nd Nephi 11, 8. Another indication that 2nd Nephi 12 to 24 is not an exegetical text is that it is introduced as an explicit citation of Isaiah, the word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Nephi values Isaiah's words, but his children do not understand Isaiah. And yet, Nephi seeks to preserve Isaiah's words for his children. An easy way to resolve this dilemma would be to modify Isaiah's words. Nephi has the tools to do this, but Nephi does not do so in 2nd Nephi 12 to 24. The data in Table 1 suggests that Nephi needed both to comment on this text and change a few words. Instead of placing comments in 2nd Nephi 21, which would risk compromising the record, Nephi rewrites these 4 verses in a later section. This suggests Nephi will not allow even minor changes to the record in 2nd Nephi 12 to 24. Such fidelity we would expect with a document with a formal extrinsic purpose, such as a verbatim deposition. Given the textual freedom enjoyed by scribes in Nephi's day, it seems clear that they copied text verbatim as a deliberate choice. Lengthy verbatim citations, citations without explanation, formal introduction of speakers with biographical detail, and addressing the reader in second person are all features that exist in 2nd Nephi that are not characteristic of Nephi's writing generally. Conclusion. The Book of Mormon was translated without punctuation or extensive formatting. This lack of formal features can sometimes make it difficult to know what we are reading. 2nd Nephi contains an agreement, 2nd Nephi 1-4, followed by 3 witness statements, 2nd Nephi 6-10, 12-24, 25-28, followed by a plaintiff statement, 2nd Nephi 33. Considering the writing conventions of the culture in which it was written, I suggest that 2nd Nephi is best understood as a legal archive or collection of legal documents. Supporting this view are Nephi's allusions to sealing the record and to a bar of judgment, his discussion of the law of witnesses, his reference to Isaiah and Jacob as witnesses, formatting consistent with Neo-Babylonian deposition, and plaintiff statements, practices used in Neo-Babylonian legal procedures, such as requesting a judgment be made in the absence of, but with the assurance of, additional future evidence, and finally, uncharacteristically formal and highly faithful citations. 2nd Nephi 6-33 is consistent with ancient Near East trial and legal proceedings, particularly those heavily influenced by Neo-Babylonian legal culture. Both Martin's and Welsh's observation that 2nd Nephi 1-4 serves as a de facto treaty or legal document strengthens this position and forces us to consider Jacob's and Isaiah's words in that context. While all of the records on metal plates were likely construed in the aggregate as a witness, 2nd Nephi's unique formatting argues strongly that it should be viewed as a document appropriate on its own merits, based on such legal convention. It follows that, given the well-described practice of rewriting scripture during the early Second Temple period and earlier, only 2nd Nephi 12-24 should be considered a citation of Isaiah. Supplemental information. Table S1 includes a partial list of topics that are common to all 3 depositions. Instead of viewing Nephi's writing as repetitive or obsessive, we can now view 2nd Nephi as a collation of depositions culminating in a plaintiff statement.